All right. Hello, Internet. We are the Cinema Joes.
We need to find a better
our,
opening line.
starting our first movie in this marathon that we're calling the Alternative Superhero Films Marathon. And we're going to start with a film called Swamp Thing from 1982. It's written and directed by Wes Craven. And, this is kind of an auspicious start to our marathon because you have a very different kind of superhero here, one that's created, sort of doesn't necessarily have a costume, and his alter ego is sort of not his own choice. And, it was filmed on kind of a shoestring budget. It definitely has the look of a cheaper film. And it's just a story about a guy who lives in the swamp who is a research scientist and apparently is working on something very secretive, so he has to be protected, but that doesn't really help him out at all. And, spills his serum all over himself, and he transforms into this thing called Swamp Thing, and has to team up with a government agent.
Cable, her name is.
I think her name is Alice.
Alice Cable. I just know they refer to her as Cable.
Yeah.
She teams up with Alice to try to track down the people who, were sort of responsible for him, who stole his serum, headed by Dr. Arcane. So I guess it's interesting. This film, guys, it definitely has a cheap quality to it. It's very campy. But before we discuss the quality, I guess I wanted to sort of get into the theme of our marathon. So I guess what I want to start with is, do you think this film fits the trappings of what we expect from a superhero film? And then, I guess, alternatively, in what ways does it deviate from our expectations for a superhero?
That's a good question. I honestly, when I was watching the movie, it felt to me more like the villain, especially. The villain was very Bond villain-esque. So it was almost like a Bond film, but where Bond was a swamp monster.
Yeah, it was more. It came across as a little bit more of a thriller in terms of it's sort of like a spy thriller in its tone. Of course, that necessarily isn't like anti-comic book. I mean, like the Captain America: Winter Soldier was a spy thriller.
Yeah.
The difference, of course, is this is obviously not a highly, highly polished studio work. You can see the strings everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
I thought the suit was surprisingly good for their budget and the period.
It definitely fit in with sort of the campiness and the cheapness. But yeah, it's interesting, Casey, when you mentioned about the villain being like a Bond villain. That actor has actually played a Bond villain.
Really?
Yeah,
that's funny.
in my favorite, not my favorite, the best named Bond movie, Octopussy. But yeah, it's interesting, just like drawing upon an actor who's been in like that kind of stuff, and so it's very much a role that's like kind of, I feel like, tailor-made for that kind of actor.
Yeah. Now, like Noah was saying, it doesn't necessarily make it not a superhero film. In fact, you could even argue Bond is a superhero in the same way Bruce Wayne is a superhero.
Yeah.
So in that sense, sure, it fits in with that. But Kayla and I were talking about exactly what makes a superhero. Like, what is the definition of a superhero in terms of our conversations, in terms of our marathon, in terms of the movies that Hollywood are making. I think it's important to address for this.
Like when we say superhero, do we mean someone with special powers? Do we mean someone who has powers or has some sort of skill and is a legitimately good person? Or simply someone who goes to extreme measures and does extreme things to achieve a certain goal?
Yeah.
Because especially when we get into the next movie, Darkman, we're going to be talking about a main character who's not necessarily like Captain America, who's just a good guy.
Right.
That's the whole shtick for Captain America. But then on the other hand, you have Tony Stark's Iron Man, who's just a douchebag. But he's a very funny dude.
And he tries to do good things.
And has, I think, at his heart, is a good person.
Yeah.
That seems good. But it's interesting here because we have the Swamp Thing who does seem to be a good person. Vengeance is still, I think, a quality of his that certainly ties in to who he is, though, in terms of he was the people who are responsible for disfiguring him. He still gets even with them, and I think
But
that is part
yeah.
of it.
But is
But
it revenge or is it protection for Cable?
that's a good question. That's a good point because it almost seems like the two are tied together. Like if he's
Yeah.
going to protect Alice, who he cares about, before he transforms, then it's almost like he's going to fulfill his vengeance anyway.
Mhm.
If he's going to accomplish that, because he has to.
Yeah, I think with him, I think it was much more of a protective aspect because he doesn't begin to attack I'm going to call them the militiamen because they're basically like a militia of
Yeah,
sorts.
they're like gorillas.
Mm.
Yeah, they're guerrillas.
They're
He-
mercenaries more
he
than
doesn't
not.
start to
Yeah,
attack.
probably. Yeah.
He doesn't start to attack the guerrillas until they try to kill Cable, and then he begins attacking them. Then he begins killing them.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
Right.
and he really only shows up when she's in danger.
Yeah, and that's something that threw me off a little bit, but I guess wasn't too surprising. He's really more like a secondary character, especially after he transforms. And it
Yeah.
seems like Alice is really more of the main character.
Yeah.
He kind of comes in and has to save her.
That's true, but I really did like the focus on Cable.
Yeah, no, I do too.
One way, I have to say, one way in which I think this very much does meet or does match what we see in superhero and comic book movies now is the basic story and the setup and the characters themselves are either very, very simple or there's the potential for complexity that they sort of gloss over.
Mm.
Like the research he's doing for this mutant combination of plant and animal DNA. That's never really explained. They never really dig into that. They just say, okay.
Yeah, they do
it
briefly
does.
gloss over it. It's about feeding a hungry earth. If you can get food that plants that can survive in deserts, you can feed millions and millions
It's a plot
of people.
device. It's the plot device, basically.
Yeah.
And the characters themselves are pretty simple. None of them are really deep characters.
Mhm.
Not that they weren't good characters. I love Jude.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
He was the
I
real
love-
hero of the film. Let's not kid.
I love Jude so much. When it looked. Are we gonna do a spoiler alert here? Should we do a spoiler alert?
I think all of our videos include spoiler alerts. Plus, this is 30 years old. I don't think it's a problem.
Just in case, spoiler alert. When it looks like they'd killed Jude, I was prepared to flip over the kitchen table. I was just waiting. I was like, if he's dead, I'm flipping the table.
It's really interesting because the film never seemed like it was going in that direction of introducing a side character, but then it did. I'm like, okay, I guess we're going along with this now. All right.
Who cares? I love the funniest lines in the movie was, does this place have a gun? What sort of place do you think this is?
Of course we do. Yeah.
Oh, I looked up the original trailer for the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god, it's such an 80s trailer. But they show like a lot of these scenes of like guys fighting in action, like people getting thrown, and then it just cuts to Jude in his chair going, "Uh-oh, here comes trouble."
That's funny.
Yeah.
But actually, I was going to say, as far as the main female character is concerned, again, like not a very charismatic actress, not a very detailed or I can't necessarily say she's a well-written character, but I love the fact that every time the gorillas try to take her, she kicks their asses.
Yeah. You're
Like
right.
the one
That's
guy,
one of the first things you see.
she beats him unconscious.
Yeah. She just she steals the one guy's machine gun and just starts firing it like from the hip.
Yeah.
Yeah, just shoots the guy like.
Which is, and Noah, you're right. I like that about her, though. It seemed like later on, like, do you remember when she has the revolver? And
It blew up in her hand.
Yeah, and the girls actually like make a remark about it too.
Some gun or something like
It's
that.
really
they say.
strange because like it seemed like they had established her as like a woman who is who takes charge, who maybe has experience.
I think the issue was more with the
All
gun
of a
there.
sudden, she's just a helpless damsel in distress.
No, I felt like the issue there was the gun itself. It was just a shitty gun.
She even says this gun belongs at a museum or something like that. Like it's really old.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. I guess I missed that.
It was. She does have that one moment where she's on the road and she doesn't just jump into the swamp and swim away.
Yeah.
That was stupid.
Yeah.
That was very stupid.
Well,
So,
she had to be badass until Swamp Thing came back,
yeah.
and then she
They
became the
needed a
damsel.
reason. They needed a reason for Swamp Thing to jump out and stop the truck. I get that.
And I guess that was a little disappointing because when they first introduced her and when she first has to, um,
Escape.
kick some butt, she does.
Mhm.
And then
The
it's like,
sound effect they used of her beating the one guy. I was like, wow, this guy spends all his life in the swamp training for combat, and she just knocked the shit out of him.
all that training for naught.
All of it for naught.
Can I tell you my biggest disappointment with the movie?
Yeah,
My
no, go
biggest
ahead.
disappointment with the movie was there were no alligators. They talked the entire beginning of the movie about how it was infested with alligators, and oh, look out, alligators! Not a single one.
That's true. That could have been a whole plot point unto itself.
Yeah,
That could have
and
been a
it could
plot
have been the
device.
reason she didn't go into the waters because the alligators were there. But
Apparently not. And the
And
water's clean enough to bathe in.
right.
mm.
Yeah, can we talk about the change there? Like when we first see her, she's like, "Oh, I hate swamps. There's all these living things," and it's interesting how throughout the film she gets more and more, she
Comfortable.
yeah, more comfortable to the point where we have a gratuitous frontal shot, which was like the way that was filmed was kind of interesting because like first they show her, bathing nude in the swamp, um, and then there's just like, and then I just love how the camera just like goes back, and then we see Swamp Thing like ogling
Watching.
her.
Yeah. I also love the weird. There was the flower. Like there was a weird placement of the flower that was. It looked like it was supposed to cover her boob, but it was just too low, so it covered the curve of the boob, but not the nipple or the boob itself. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel like the cameraman was not working his job properly, or he
No,
was doing a good job doing something else.
I felt that both. No, I felt that both breasts were full enough in view. That like it was intentional. Like they wanted that full frontal shot. There is one key difference between this film and most mainstream superhero movies.
What's that?
I did not mind the bathing scene.
Hmm.
What I did notice was the one scene, the one party scene at the bad guy's lair afterwards, which is just there to throw in 2 extra sets of boobs.
Oh yeah, it's
That is
totally
the
pointless.
only reason that scene exists. Her bathing in the swamp, I could get that as like, okay, she's coming to love the swamp, she's embracing it.
But then it's like,
No,
and then they take our focus away
I
because
could see that.
it's
But
like,
that one party scene was just like, oh, nope, boobs.
yep,
Okay, more boobs.
yeah,
No, wait. The scene where the guy drinks the new serum.
That's afterwards.
yep.
I
There's a
don't know what
whole
scene you're
long
talking
shot before that is just to establish that people are getting it on there.
Yep.
about. Huh. I might maybe, but I don't remember that part. I have to
That's
take your word for it though.
I'm surprised you forgot that, Casey. Did you see the edited version?
I might have.
And it's funny because Wes Craven, who is responsible for this movie, he sort of got his start, in these low budget horror exploitation movies, which were exploitative both in violence and in nudity, particularly for women. So that's something that I guess carried over to this movie, which is I guess was a little unfortunate because I didn't feel like it added anything. And it was sort of like, oh, we've established this woman who seems very strong and somewhat independent, at least until Swamp Thing is saving her at every turn, and then we're like reducing her to boobs.
The damsel in boobs. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I can sort of see that, but at the same time, the fact that there is open nudity in it makes it a little bit more adult than than at least the mainstream comic book movies have been willing to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Watchmen accepted, but
Right.
Watchmen is Watchmen.
It comes with the pros and the cons.
Yeah.
The fact that this is a low budget film, I think there were less expectations from the studio that we might have in some of the more recent,
Yeah.
Captain America, for example. Can we talk a little bit about? I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of his powers.
Okay.
That's Swamp Thing's sort of power, which are not necessarily well defined, but I don't necessarily think they have to be. A lot of it's interesting. The movie kind of plays with this idea of the serum having both destructive but also rejuvenative powers.
Mm-hmm.
He spills it in that, or at first you see it has this kind of explosive quality to it, but then you see
Yeah.
flowers coming up from the floorboards.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting to me because that's also sort of the conflict between Alec, I think is the name of Swamp Thing before he's Swamp Thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
His,
Alec Holland, I think, something like that.
yeah, his mission, like his thinking is that he's going to use these powers to feed the hungry of the world.
Mhm.
Very much this kind of, let's use this power, which has the power for destruction for ultimately good ends. And then you have Dr. Arcane, who's very much think what we could use this power for. Like it's much more selfish and much more. So it's just interesting. The same artifact has two very different uses.
And you see that in a lot of superhero movies, like for
Yeah.
example, Iron Man. The Iron Man suit, they wanted it could be used for good in the right hands, or it could be used for evil in the right hands. What was I gonna say though? What Doctor Arcane's not powers? What the hell? His motive. What was his motive? Was it for? Did he want to make weapons, or did he just want to use the serum to make money?
Yeah, it's a good
Kayla's
question.
telling me in the background.
He
He
has
wanted.
a weird monologue where he rambles about immortality.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe he wanted immortality for himself, but that was after he saw what it could do to
I think it was
Alec.
immortality.
Before that, why was he so interested in getting the serum? Kayla's telling me in the background that he wanted to make money off the serum. Like I guess Alec wanted to feed the hungry for free. There's a real world counterpart where somebody had a cure for a disease. I can't remember exactly what it was. And some corporation was like, no, we have to get that cure so we can make money off that cure. So I think that's how it started off, which is interesting. Just an interesting tangent to what Justin was saying. The difference in how one thing can be so beautiful and yet there can be evil from these beautiful things.
And
Yeah.
and ultimately when you see the Swamp Thing, there is that quality to him. He is he's destructive in the sense that you know he knows how to wall up a bad guy, but at the same time there is this the fact that he can regenerate himself, and that his
Heal
intentions are
others.
ultimately noble, even despite everything the trauma and the tragedy that he's been through.
He can heal others.
Hmm.
Yes, that,
It's a big
yeah,
thing.
I mean,
Yeah, and he can kill people, but he also saves lives as well.
right.
He only kills one of those guys, maybe two.
He kills. Oh gosh, I'm
He
trying to remember.
crushes the
He
skull
kills
of
like
the.
the lead. He kills the lead gorilla, and I'm not quite sure how.
He crushed his skull.
Happened? Was that what happened? Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
He
think
uses
something
brute
like
force
that.
to just like to here like on my head. Bah! I crushed my skull. And I just remember you guys can't see me, but the video viewers will be able to see that.
Yeah, so there, I guess, and the other thing that's interesting, it actually made me think of Batman, particularly in Batman Begins, when we first sort of see Batman in action against other bad guys. It's almost like he sort of pops out from, you know, he just appears and seemingly out of nowhere.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I was going to bring up Batman Begins in our conversation of Darkman.
Yes.
Yeah, that'll
Or the Dark Knight anyway, but
We'll get to that though. We'll get to that.
Right. But I love the sense like it's like, and part of it is the magic of editing, uh, in the sense that like we'll see the bad guys up against Swamp Thing, and then all of a sudden we'll cut to the bad guys, and they're like, "Where'd he go?" And then it's like the next shot he'll come out of like some impossible angle,
Yeah.
and it's just like, and the movie kind of says like, oh, this is like his power because he knows the swamp so well, but it's very much just kind of like the magic of editing, really.
Yeah.
But that was kind of interesting to see because it's not as direct. It's much more sort of like guerrilla tactics and knowing your environment better than your opponent.
Yeah.
Plus, he's like indestructible, so he doesn't even have to be so smart. He's the Hulk of the swamp. I mean,
Yeah, really.
Basically, yeah. I'm curious. What did you guys think of the villain himself and his very, as we've established, very vague and undefined plan?
I thought he was a cool villain in the sense because he was an interesting foil, an interesting counterpart for Alec's character, for the Swamp Thing, where they're both intelligent, they're both trying to outthink the other one, but one's much more passive, whereas Arcane is much more, he's the driving force of the entire movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right. He's shallow. The whole thing is one dimensional.
I never he's clearly trying to be like this interesting in terms of how slimy he is Bond villain, but there just wasn't a lot there to work with, I felt.
Yeah.
No, you're right. And also, as we learn with the powers of the serum, that it sort of makes manifest who you really are in some sense. So that's why you have the one henchman who turns into a dwarf, which was I was like, at that point, you're kind of like, what's going on here? Why are we spending so much time on this henchman who seemed pretty minor up until this point?
I love this henchman's the antlers that he basically wears half the time. He looks like he has antlers.
Yeah.
And every
I
time
thought that was kind of interesting. It releases the inner, like who you really are in some
Inner
sense.
essence, yeah.
And I guess Arcane is a wolf man.
I took it as like a bit. He was just a monster, like
wolf, rat, bear, cocoon, butterfly.
I thought he looked like one of the rejected wild things from Where the Wild Things Are.
Or like a Power Ranger monster. I felt like it was a fight between Power Ranger monsters in the end.
Yeah.
And how when he's running out of his complex, he's like, "I have weapons everywhere. I'm gonna take the broadsword."
Yeah. Well, the machete proved more effective against on Swamp Thing than the guns did, so maybe that was a smart choice.
Actually, no, that's probably why. I have to say, I couldn't help but riff tracks the film a little bit, and whenever the fat guy later on was on screen, and whenever someone said something to him, I would try to like imitate his voice and be like, "Could I go back to wearing my moose antlers now?"
I have to say though, the best part of the movie were like the last 4 lines. I don't remember what they were, but I just felt like it pulled it all together in a way that was really well done. I wish I could remember the line. Noah, you said you read something that commented on that?
Not on that one line. I did mention Roger Ebert's review. The one scene that he says in his review, the one scene that won him over, and it was a scene that I really liked as well, was when he gets his arm cut off, and she's like, "Does it hurt? Are you okay? Like, how bad is it? Are you gonna die?" Oh no, she says, "Does it hurt?" And he says, "Only when I laugh." And there's sort of, I felt that the movie did have sort of a sense of humor about itself.
Yes.
But also a sense of atmosphere, like it knew what it wanted to do, even though the director and his team obviously did not always have the budget or the technological capability to quite pull it off. Like I do get the sense from watching this movie, like, okay, they had a definitive idea of how they wanted this to look and feel. And I felt that enough of it came across that it's obviously, I can't say that it's a good movie because there are still so many like weird editing choices.
Yeah.
But I did really enjoy it because like it's one of those things where you can tell that there's clear effort behind this.
Yeah, I felt the script, the dialogue was bad,
it was
and the acting was subpar.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. It's funny because like I feel like there'd be like occasional flashes of wit.
Yeah.
Just kind of, but like for the most part, like anytime you had exposition, basically, where they're trying to explain how the serum works or anything like that.
Except when Jude spoke.
Very dry and
except for Jude. Yeah, no, Jude's lines were the best.
It's funny. I had a hard time like trying to. I don't know what it is. I had a hard time trying to understand him, but I still really liked him because there was just a certain vibe he gave off, and he was so unexpected. He was just such a pleasant surprise.
Pleasant because his dialogue was good. The actor delivered the lines perfectly. That unsuspected or.
Here come trouble.
That was a weird line, but
I really liked Adrienne Barbeau, who played Alice.
Yeah, she was fine too.
I liked her a lot. I felt like she brought just like she had a great she just had a great screen presence.
Mm-hmm.
And a sort of an intensity that made me think a little bit of Ripley. I don't think this character is as good as Ripley, from the Alien series, but it definitely had that kind of just this, just a sense of being especially being in the company of men. I think that was really, and the strength that she showed realizing that. I think
Yeah.
I really liked that a lot. I wish they could have done a little bit more with her, but I did very much like the actress who played
That was really my biggest issue. She was underdeveloped. The actress didn't have a lot to work with.
her.
She
But
started strong, but went down to become a damsel
Yeah,
in the end. That's what it came down to.
she does hold her own in terms of being
Performance.
being in this very male dominated
Yeah.
situation.
right.
So let's start wrapping it up. Justin,
Yeah.
do you have to
Okay.
take us out with something?
So I guess it seems like we all at least somewhat enjoyed this movie, even if I don't know if we necessarily would call it a good movie. There was a certain charm
Yeah.
to it, and
Yeah.
I think we did see. I did appreciate that there is some kind of there's definitely personality to this movie, and you got the sense that there didn't have too many hands in the pot in terms
Yeah.
of like an interfering studio, which is always, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I would absolutely, if to anyone who is a fan of or who can enjoy some of those more low budget action movies like this, like I would absolutely recommend it.
yeah,
If for nothing else, but its classicness. I mean, it's a classic.
Yeah. For like like a really old cult, pulpy-ish, low
Yeah.
budget hero movie, yeah, I would definitely say see it.
yeah,
Let me
uh,
ask one question before
sure.
we leave. Is Swamp Thing a superhero? Because I don't think we ever fully answered that question. What a superhero is. Would you call him a superhero, and why?
It is based on a comic.
Okay, so he's a comic character. Not all the comic
Some of the
characters are
characters aren't
superheroes.
always superheroes though. So I'm gonna say he is because he has all, I guess, what you consider hallmarks of of superheroes in terms of definitely in terms of powers. Um, I think the noble intentions is a big thing. Though we can argue whether a superhero needs to have noble intentions or if that's something else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, wow, it's like those are kind of like the basic things I guess when I think of a superhero.
Powers and noble intentions, and actually
Yeah,
doing something. It's
if
more than
there's something I'm
intentions.
forgetting, please let me know. But you know,
Noah, what about
I
you?
would call him, I would definitely call him a superhero, though he is. He's a different kind in
Yeah.
terms of, especially not having a costume. I think, and
Yeah.
not being able to remove his mask. That's certainly something that sets him apart.
Which is a great. It's actually that's going to be a great lead-in, a great analogy to Darkman, who has the
Oh yeah, we'll be able to draw.
entire opposite problem. But Noah,
Tune
answer the
in
question
next
now.
time for Darkman.
Noah, do you think Swamp Thing is a superhero, and why?
I would say yes. He's obviously not a masked crime fighter superhero. But would I call him a superhero? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Just like I would say Toxic Avenger could qualify as a superhero.
But why?
Yeah.
Similar line actually. Similar. I don't know if maybe this was an inspiration for Toxic Avenger.
This was before Toxic Avenger, so it's possible.
All right, I guess that's our cue to head on. So thank you for watching this video. We are Movie Joes. Check out our next video, which will be on
Tune
Darkman
in
from
next
1990. I think we all will be talking about how. Just watch the video and find out. Thank you all.